We're doing along there. And if you have a good protocol, you kind of allow all of the above, and you allow people just to kind of play around with things and try things. And there's only going to be a certain level of decentralization that you can achieve for a generation of the system. And if you're moving in a direction where over time you get more, you're probably doing it right. If you move from more to less, you're probably not in the right protocol mindset. The other thing is there is a Pareto principle for most social systems, and that Pareto principle is that 20-30% will probably do 80%, 90% of the work. And that's true for almost every human endeavor. And great enterprises, there's a Pareto principle for how people make money. For if you look at high performing people like athletes and things like that, that principle tends to exist. And so it's pretty reasonable, you say, in a control system, you're going to have those types of dynamics that occur, especially if you don't have a Gini coefficient that is conducive to perfect egalitarian distribution of the underlying asset. Now, um, this is the state of reality as it is today, and things are going to change in the next 6 months, and they'll change again in another 6 months. And I'm really curious to see what direction it's going to go in. We also have been looking a lot into multi-resource consensus. So we've examined. Excuse me for a second. We've been looking a lot into multi-resource consensus, and we just published a paper. So if you guys Google Minotaur ePrint multi-resource consensus, the paper just came out, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, where we actually developed a model where you can layer proof of stake with proof of work or proof of other stuff and run the system as multi-resource. So it may be the case that you can subsidize small pool operators not by a single set of parameterization, but by actually introducing a second control protocol. And will enable that control protocol will enable basically the system to have different weightings for rewards other than just straight up delegation. But again, super hard problem. There's a lot of moving pieces to it. And every time you've accomplished something, you always have to weigh out, the enemy of good is better. Because when you start changing these things, you may actually introduce regressions in decentralization, or in security, or in quality. Another thing is that stateful operators are going to make multiple revenue streams. I don't think people are fully aware of that. When we talk about building sidechains on Cardano, those sidechains will likely have their own tokens. And that means when you're making blocks in those sidechains, there's a high probability you're going to get inflation for that. So it's entirely possible in 2 or 3 years from now, as a stateful operator, you make like 10 tokens of revenue instead of just ADA as your revenue. We're already kind of seeing this with these ISPOs and these other things, but that's more of that is going to be happening. So the story is not completely written on the economics of what it takes to run as an operator, the competitive realities, especially when partial delegation comes. And I know I keep talking about partial delegation, but I actually finally have a PRD and a spec now for it. So I have high confidence that that's coming soon. And, protocols like Conclave, which will get done, and then small operators can band together and they can own a federated cooperative pool as opposed to just this Boolean decision. And then there's a lot of choice theory that exists, and then wallet competition means you're going to have a lot of different views for delegation. I think that's kind of the best all of the above answer I can give you guys.
Appreciate your answer. Thanks, Charles.
All right, next question. Do we have anybody else?
I have a curiosity question.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not a very technical person whatsoever when it comes to blockchain. I have a very basic understanding of everything, but I keep up with the news. And there's recently been a hack or an exploit on Solana, and I'm curious what your take is on all these various blockchain technologies which are exploited, and there are all these rug pulls. Um, how does that like work? Is it just like a lack of sort of development, and they're trying to rush their product really quick in an effort to get like customers? Like, how do you explain that?
Well, cryptography is super hard, and you have to understand that there's a smart cow effect. So we saw this in 1990s with the DRM systems, and so somebody say, "Oh, well, we have this way of encrypting DVDs, or we have this way of enforcing rights management for this piece of IP." And we now we can guarantee that it's encrypted, or we can guarantee that you can't copy the movie or something like that. Well, only one person in the entire world has to figure out how to defeat your scheme, and the minute that they do and they share that information, then everybody can compromise it. So what we're doing is we're building these things that have gargantuan attack surfaces on them, that require very specialized software engineering, very specialized knowledge, and we're having the people who build them have never built stuff like this before, and they're not using the right development methodologies. And then we combine that with economic incentives in literally the hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to defeat the system. So given the density of people, the incentives, and the poor craftsmanship and protocol design, and the lack of foresight, it's very common to see a flaw. And guys, it's really hard not to have a flaw. Even if you write your software perfectly, if you're using third-party stuff, if you're using third-party stuff built on Windows, third-party stuff built on Android, I mean, it can be any part of that software stack could have a small flaw in it that can result in a hack. Now, usually the most brittle parts of our industry involve the movement of value between blockchain systems. Ethereum to Solana, or Solana to Ethereum, or this chain or that chain. It's always the bridges that seem to be hit, or the smart contracts themselves, because the smart contracts are usually written in languages and in systems that are not really high assurance. And this is one of the reasons why we were so careful with the development of Plutus and the extended UTXO model. There are some things there that are slightly inconvenient to the developer, but they do prevent you from shooting yourself in the foot when you write an application. The other thing is why we
Trying to
use
ask a
defined
question here,
conformal
but
methods, because you're able to use a much more aggressive testing stack to be able to verify that your software is actually correct by construction. Now, it's not to say you won't have no bugs at all. There's plenty of bugs, there's plenty of flaws. There's certainly things people have written on Cardano, things we've written in our software that have definitely had bugs or concerns. It just means when you preponder the evidence, you have a higher probability that the things you've constructed are correct and they're okay. And the problem is we have a perverse financial incentive in the industry, which is you're incentivized for time to market and developer accessibility and expressiveness of the platform. Those three things, welcoming as many developers as possible, being as expressive as possible, meaning allowing them to do as much as possible, and rushing things to market, are a recipe for poor software quality. And when that's a web application where it means you can't, see your picture upload, or you have to restart the client, that's not such a problem. When it's your money, your identity, your livelihood, that literally is the difference between people losing millions of dollars or keeping their millions of dollars. So that's a moral hazard, effectively. And that's why you see so much poorly coded software. People are doing things the rush way because it's a gold rush and they don't really care about the consequences of their behavior.
So, what's your advice for? So, I'm not much of a DeFi guy. I'm more of a trader. I just hold tokens, typically on exchanges and in my hardware wallets. But for those who are into DeFi, and especially newcomers, what, if any, advice do you have? For example, here we had a brand new product that launched, and thankfully they restored all the funds. However, we see time and time again people getting rugged and scammed out of their money because of, you know, like you're saying, these poorly constructed, poorly coded programs. So how does one sort of choose which to use, or does it come like with the territory that you're sort of just in this new world and you just kind of have to be careful and sort of limit your risk by just being responsible?
Avoid the U.S. dollar at all costs. I don't know.
Well, okay, so the dollar is not the thing getting hacked here. It's the smart contracts and the bridges, and it's crypto that's being stolen. It's our industry that's at fault for this one. I mean, there's plenty of sins on the U.S. dollar side, but Unfortunately, software quality is not one of them in this case. So you just ask some basic due diligence questions. Who are the auditors? What level of scrutiny has gone behind the protocol design? What is the age of the protocol? What's the length of time it's been running? Do the founders of the protocol have their own money in it? What type of software are we talking about here? These basic things that you would ask for any due diligence. And this is a reason why high assurance software tends to be regulated by agencies. Like when you look at the Federal Aviation Administration, they say, hey, if you build planes and people get on planes, you have to kind of prove to the world that those planes are safe. And if you don't, they tend to crash. Well, similarly, we don't actually have in the cryptocurrency space an agency or standards right now for certification of software. There are some great companies like Certic, for example, and they do a good job, and there's others, but that's a partial solution to a broader problem. And unfortunately, there's just too much money right now in these DeFi applications, and there's too much momentum with them. And again, it goes back to those perverse three misincentives. There's an incentive to be first to market instead of best to market. There's a perverse incentive to try to focus on getting as many developers in, regardless of their skills, qualities, or credentials, or their experience writing high assurance software. And there's a perverse incentive to try to emphasize platforms that let you do as much as possible. Guys, we saw this in the web world. We saw it with JavaScript and PHP. They were security and privacy nightmares. And so many websites were brutally hacked and so much information was stolen. There's still tons of personally identifiable information that's stolen on a regular basis because those languages and experiences emphasize high expressiveness, high accessibility over security and reliability. And, they were low liability areas for the developers. When a hack occurred or a problem occurred, they seldom faced economic or criminal sanction for it. So you kind of get what you incentivize, and that's where we're at as an industry. And you have to be very methodical and careful. And we felt that there was a moral responsibility in the software that we develop and the ecosystem that we promote to do things a little differently. And that's just one of the philosophical differences between Cardano and the rest of the game.
Yeah, I guess it is a little bit tricky. For example, I like to identify myself as a frog, right, with the Frog Nation on Phantom. But then, as much of a meme/cool thing that was, as we all saw, the what's it called, the treasurer of the DAO ended up being literally a career criminal, right? So sometimes you get duped into or tricked, as much as you think you can trust a certain group of people or like how much you like something. There's like always this sort of like, because of the lack of regulation, this anonymity that comes with the space, and it's just so weird to see, that the same guys,
and
the same bad actors.
You don't necessarily need government regulation. I mean, you can use voluntary standards, self-regulatory organizations, software certifications. I mean, if people are really serious about trust the software, then they should have a real commitment about inclusive accountability. You actually have the capacity to verify that the software hits some sort of standard.
I hope this co-host Linda lets me in. I'm trying to ask Charles a question about Hex.
So, we say a lot of shit in this industry. And we say, we care so much about, code is law and protocols and don't trust people, trust math and code. Well, then shouldn't we demand that our software gives us proofs of its own quality against standards? And those standards are carefully constructed and designed, and they use very rigorous processes behind it. So if people don't invest in that and people don't buy in that, and they instead choose to buy things built on quicksand, you get what you pay for. You get what you incentivize.
So then, because I know you always say like regulation is coming, right? But how does the crypto space self-regulate, right? Because that would be the sort of the ideal scenario, right? Or there'd be like, I don't even know how that would be. How do I put this without sounding dumb? How do one go about regulating themselves within this industry, within this space? Because like, I'm an architect, we are a self-regulating field, right? We pay dues to an organization that regulates us, or we regulate ourselves through those means. So in crypto, like, I don't know how you do such a thing. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting question. And, you know, SROs are things in the financial industry you use, and there's plenty of software quality standards that exist, like CMMI and stuff from the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. You know, it's there's certainly a lot of stuff that exists, but ultimately comes down to economic incentives. Standards, marks of quality, either they're created through insurance or regulation or through consumer preferences. So if you want high quality, invest in high quality. Buy high quality. It's kind of like saying, well, how do you get more American product? Well, you buy more American product. And if you buy the cheapest option and it's not, well, then you shouldn't be surprised that people outsource things, and it's the same problem here. All right, next question.
I just woke up and how you guys doing? Hey Charles, give me a second. I'm gonna let somebody else take the mic. I got a COVID booster shot, so I'm not really feeling the best. But I wanted to join the chat and listen. Really, I didn't think I was gonna get pulled up on the stage. But I'll be back. I'll go next and let somebody else go first. So just give me a second.
Well, that's okay, Cole. I got the real thing, so you know I can empathize.
Wait a minute, you have COVID right now and you're hosting this?
Yes, I have almost.
Wow. You know, Omicron is funny. It sounds like a transformer. It sounds like you're like battling with Optimus Prime. It's so weird.
Well, hell yeah, man. Galvatron, Megatron, and now Omicron.
I'll be back in a second. Let me just pick myself up out the bed. And I want to make sure that I actually know what I'm going to ask you, but I want to make sure that my train of thought is pointed and direct so that you can give us the best answer that you can.
I appreciate it. All right, next question. Come on, y'all, don't be shy. Vlad.
Hi, Charles. I actually have one little statement. I'm in the United States for 20 years and I'm running a small company for the last 15 years. And I actually just tried to say a couple of words that I really appreciate for everything that you did for us and especially for my family. And Cardano changed pretty much our life and kind of we finally became economically independent because of Cardano and we kind of early invested into the project. And more than that, I actually, my first Twitter person that I started to follow was you. Everything that I know about crypto is actually came, probably most of the things came from you. And I really want to say big thank you to you for everything that you're doing. My question to you is not about technical things. I have many organizations in the country where I'm coming from that they struggle with even inside of their organization with decentralization and how to create a more decentralized system.
Gotta grab my
And
charger.
we were talking about voting systems, and I was suggesting them to look deeper into what Wyoming is doing and how they were kind of working with you guys. So my question for you is, even one of those organizations recently started to contact you with probably just email, but I don't know if that was the right way. So my question is, for those people that they trying to organize a better way and implement maybe some parts of the Cardano voting system, can you give us any direction who we should contact, where we should do research, and maybe some ideas how we can implement those?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way of thinking about e-voting is first, e-voting is among the most difficult of things to solve. There was a lot of enthusiasm in the 1980s and 1990s with e-voting, and there was a lot of bold proclamations. It was kind of like the fusion of the cryptography space. So like fusion research started in the 1940s, and everyone, oh yeah, by the 1960s we'll have fusion, and then in the 1960s they're like, oh, in the 1980s and 90s we'll have fusion, and then in the 80s and 90s they're like, oh, by the 2015 we'll have fusion, and they gave this French guy like $15 billion to go and figure out how to build a tokamak. Okay. So anyway, sorry, the dogs are getting a little crazy. 1 second. So anyway, e-voting is kind of that way. Where in the 1980s, a lot of people talked about e-voting, and they said, well, by 2000, all voting will be digital and it'll all be online. And then it turned out that there were incredibly complex issues related to identity, related to software security, accessibility, and fidelity about e-voting that kind of got in the way. And 20 years later, it's no better of a situation because you actually have to solve several hard problems at the same time. You have to have a secure platform for the voting to occur on. You have to have a trusted identity and identity provider to verify that the person voting is the right person to vote. And then you actually have to have the mechanics and tools to be able to check that the vote was recorded correctly and that the integrity of the entire election system is okay. So usually we use something called a trusted bulletin board for that. And that trusted bulletin board is usually a blockchain mechanism. So we've solved one of the three pretty nicely as an industry because the same thing that you can use to verify there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin or 45 million ADA could also be saying there's only ever going to be as many votes as registered voters in the election. And you're able to verify them. There's inclusive accountability there. So that's a good enhancement that blockchain's brought in. But you're still left with the identity problem, and you're still left with the trusted computing environment problem, because how many of you have perfectly trusted cell phones or laptops or desktop computers, and that these things can't be tampered with? Then there's also questions about privacy, and there's also questions about what should you be allowed to do. For example, if you can check your vote, you may be able to sell your vote. Now, I'd argue that's not a problem because we allow mail-in ballots, which allows you to do the exact same thing, but some people think that's an issue and somehow different. Privacy, should your vote be anonymous or public? Now, in Switzerland, in certain cantons, votes are public. People know how you voted. In other places in the world, most places in the world, ballots are private. So it's a very complex thing. So your question was, hey, if I wanted to implement an e-voting system that was based on Cardano DNA in my jurisdiction, what should I do? What I would do is start with a small-scale democratic experiment, a club, a small company, some process of choice theory, which involves dozens or hundreds of people, and then do an experiment there. A primary for a small-scale politician who gets to be mayor of the town, these types of things, because it's a low-stakes thing, and you're kind of educating, training people, and in some cases don't vote on who's in control, but maybe vote on preferences. Like, if our local sports team wins the big game, do we have the parade on Tuesday or do we have the parade on Thursday? That's a low-stakes vote. And then what you do is you use that over time to slowly but surely build up a corpus of reliability inside the system, and then eventually you get to a point where you're able to do higher stakes things and gradually work your way. The other thing is I firmly believe if a voting system is to be credible, it needs to be hybridized. So you need to combine your voting system, your digital voting system, with a paper-based voting system. So you get a receipt with your vote, and you can use that to check the digital system. And there's actually a lot of people that have studied these hybrid systems of where you have a paper and a digital component. And we certainly explore these things, and we've had a lot of discussions with nation states and other entities about the potential for e-voting, and they usually never get beyond the conceptual phase because of the colossally difficult process. Now, one of the things we are exploring is in the state of Wyoming, introducing some e-voting using blockchain-based technology for primaries and caucuses, these types of things. And then that's a small scale thing. And then maybe we can build our way gradually over time to a statewide election, but that'll take years. And then if that's successful, within decades, you can do multiple states, and eventually you can do the federal election and have that universal property. And hopefully trusted hardware will evolve at the same time.
Come on, lady, you can let 10 people in at a time.
It's a really fun question.
Let me in. I want to ask a question.
It's such an intricate thing, and I don't think people realize how intricate it is. And they think, oh, because we have blockchain, this solves everything. Or it's the same question as like social media. Blockchain doesn't actually solve the social media problem. It can help you in a certain respect. It's a tool. But there are other things you have to solve at the same time. It's a very complex problem.
I swear, if I don't get in, I'm gonna be fucking pissed.
Riley, go ahead.
Hey Charles. So I started learning Plutus back in June of last year, and I've been working really hard ever since. I just left my full-time job recently, and I'm now working full-time developing Plutus for DAOs to have open source DAO tooling on Cardano, and I'm working with the 8DAO community. Something I've noticed recently, and it's been kind of a struggle for me, is some of the off-chain tooling. So I'm working with the Cardano serialization library from Emergo, and it's been modified by Alessandro from Berrypool. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he made it so that it's possible to use it to interact with smart contracts by sort of enabling datum and redeemer usage. And unfortunately, the version that I'm using that has been customized from Alessandro is not capable of using minting inside of the TX builder. And so I'm kind of like in this position where I'm doing a lot of work because there's a lack of standardization in the off-chain libraries that are used. And I'm kind of curious as to what your advice would be. Definitely not trying to complain. I love the L1 that you sort of made it possible for me to leverage, and I really appreciate the work you've done. I just, from my perspective, I'm trying to reach out to Alessandro to see if I can help him with some of the work he's doing. But outside of that, like, what else do you think is a good way for me to move forward so that I can have sort of a front end that I'm actually going to be happy with and be able to extend in the future, as opposed to just needing to scrap to restart with when something is standardized?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for the support, Riley. It means the world to me, and I'm glad that we have you on board. This is the problem with being a pioneer in an emerging industry, is that some things don't work the way you'd like them to work. I remember the early days of things like Clojure, for example, or any of these new languages that come out. You know, you'd read some documentation, and it's like, oh, install Lenogen, and oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah, you get it working. Oh, by the way, it doesn't work on that. Oh shit! I just spent 2 hours trying to get this damn thing to work, and it doesn't work. And you know, it's the same for Plutus right now. You ask questions like, well, what's the canonical library? Well, there's what we build, and there's what Emergo build, and there's what DC Spark is building, and then there's all these third-party things that are happening with the big dApp developers like the Melds of the world, some of which are public, some of which are private. And so what has to happen is eventually there has to be consolidation and standardization and canonical design patterns. And also the Plutus language itself is insufficiently expressive, I would argue, to replicate all of the DeFi patterns that we've come to know and love. So things like reference inputs and so forth are absolutely necessary if you're going to be building useful applications. So on our side, we're kind of squaring the circle by building in both directions. So one, we're enhancing the overall expressiveness of Plutus through language updates and introducing a lot of things that can reduce enormous amounts of bloat in your program. And then the other side is we're trying to improve the tooling ourselves and through standards through the community, like working with the Cardano DeFi Alliance. I was recently in Austin, Texas, and I met with the head of the Cardano DeFi Alliance, and this was actually a topic we discussed. And they put together a nice proposal for us, and there's already a group of developers that are working with them. And actually, I encourage you to reach out to the DeFi Alliance and talk to them. Now, in terms of your particular problem, I think your best bet is probably to talk to Alessandro and say, okay, well, here's what I'm trying to solve. Can we work together on this? And let's try to alleviate the short-term pain. And then what ends up happening is through standards-driven process, eventually we alleviate the global pain for everybody. Unfortunately, things are changing. Plutus's semantics themselves are changing. The design of Cardano is changing. The utility of Cardano is changing. A lot of interfaces are still very rough. For example, DB Sync is a very rough product, and a lot of people know that, and we're working very hard to try to change that. And, you know, if you look at the evolution of Cardano, it wasn't always the case that our exchange listing experience was great. Now it is. We have GraphQL and Rosetta and all these other things. It's just beautiful and very easy to work with, and it's pretty turnkey. But back in the day, it was hell for Binance and Bittrex back in 2017. So these things do get better, and they get better when people use them and they're vocal about them. And I really appreciate you bringing it up. And also, I imagine because you were a Plutus pioneer that you were in the developer Discord, and I hope that you stay there and you continue to point out things. And if we're doing our job correctly, there should be a lot of hooks for you to grab onto to kind of communicate your needs. And we'll work as hard as we can on our side. And
Come on, let me in.
As hard as they can. And actually, a lot of people are solving their own problems now inside the ecosystem. So that's kind of the best answer I can give you. I know it's not the most satisfactory one of saying, hey, by this date and this time, it's going to be solved. But it's where we're at as an ecosystem, and it's the nature from all of these development experiences, whether you're talking about Scala or Clojure, the early days of Java, the early days of C++. These things are very rough in that respect. I remember also with Ethereum and the development of Solidity, there's still enormous problems there. The good news is that you've been on the right train. You know, extended UTXO and Plutus, long term, you're going to be building much more concise, much more deterministic applications with predictable costs. You'll be able to verify that your software works. And ultimately, I think you can have much happier customers long term, and you're being responsible long term. The other good news is that Plutus comes from the Haskell ecosystem, which was started in 1985. So while we're the new kid on the block in certain respects, as you're learning, as you become a better functional programmer, there are techniques and methodologies and ideas that are nested within these ecosystems that are decades long in development that really help you think through software in a very different way. And I'd argue long term will be a big competitive advantage. So I'm sorry it's a little rough right now, but that's what happens with these things. And I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad we can learn from you as much as you learn from us.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And you know, it's funny that you mentioned the DeFi Alliance. I think I have a meeting scheduled with them virtually pretty soon here, and then also, I'm kind of nervous. I can't remember what else I was going to say, but I really appreciate your time, Charles, and thank you.
Thanks for being here. Next question.
Hey,
let me in. I
have a quick question speaking
Come on.
the SPO side. What's the short-term solution for addressing the network and the propagation issues the SPOs are having, and where are we at in the roadmap with Hydra?
So you're saying network propagation delays? I mean, we're still broadcasting blocks under the 5-second limit, unless you're saying that the network.
No, yeah, we definitely are broadcasting blocks less than 5 seconds. I just know that a few SPOs we're missing and ghosting blocks, even though we're up 100%.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's probably a configuration issue or a lack of resources, either bandwidth or memory for the SPOs. I mean, we ship 1.33, and that did help the network tremendously. But you know, it's going to be rough until pipelining comes, and it's going to be rough until input endorsers come, and so it's going to be a constant struggle this year. I mean, we have a really popular club that we built, and for a long time we didn't let anybody in, and now we just opened, and like there's just this mad rush, and you guys are the bartenders. So you're getting your asses kicked until we kind of clear that shit out, and we're trying to open up more bar capacity and better processes.
Come on, Linda, let me in.
That's the nature of where
Gosh.
we're at. The good news is this club is going to be popular.
Oh man, I want to ask Charles this question so bad.
That you're going to have a few rough weekends. So that's where we're at, and I'm going to do everything in my power to try to clean things up as best we can. I mean, we obviously work with you guys very closely and communicate with you guys very closely. I know Tim and Ben definitely do that, and Sam definitely does that as well. We try to optimize our software as much as possible. There's a lot of business process optimization that's underway. In particular, we're examining the network stack very closely and seeing if we can improve things there. We recently made some major updates to reduce memory utilization on the underlying node infrastructure. We included some new data structures specifically for that, and there's more things that are on the roadmap that I think will kind of relieve that a little bit. Unfortunately, a lot of SPOs are going to have to upgrade their hardware because of side chains and a litany of other things that are coming down the road. It's going to become heavier to run a SPO. Not a substantial upgrade, like you don't have to run a supercomputer. I'm not expecting you to bolt a Cray on your back, but you know, with pipelining and all this other stuff, the memory and CPU requirements will go up. And obviously, as we're moving more data on the network, you're going to have a good internet connection. But that's the price of doing business as a SPO. And if the network is properly designed, that should be offset by the profit of doing business. So it's an ongoing dialogue in that respect. I appreciate the work you do, and you know, we're doing everything in our power to keep our heads above water. But it's definitely a complicated one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the weekly SPO meetings we have. That is, I'm glad we started those back up, and those are so beneficial for everyone.
Let me in.
Hello? Should I go next?
All right, Cole, you finally got that question for me, man?
Yeah. So I want to kind of just lay the foundation for a quick second, just so you guys understand my perspective and where I'm coming from, because to be honest with you, I'm not a crypto expert. I'm not a Web3 expert. I've learned a lot in the last year, but I come from a completely different background. Now, just generally speaking, fundamentally and foundationally, one thing I want to make clear is that I'm Buddhist. And as a Buddhist, I believe that there's only one truth in the universe. And the one truth in the universe is that whatever presently exists is the truth. And the only question is that, what are you going to do with it? And as a Buddhist, I also believe that
This guy's got a weird way of asking questions.
Human experience that we all share is that we all suffer. And that the number one problem in the world is that most of us don't know how to handle our suffering, our own suffering, much less the suffering of others.
Getting all philosophical.
And then finally, I also believe as a Buddhist that the one solution that we have for our suffering is our ability with our power of choice. I believe that the power of choice is our one superpower. It's just that we don't necessarily utilize, we don't always put on our cape in the way that we should, let's put it this way, with our choices. But if we choose enlightenment, we'll always have an answer to suffering. It's not going to fix the suffering overnight. It's not going to, there's no magic button, but it will always move us in the right direction. And Charles, I commend you and applaud you for, whether I don't know what your spiritual thinking is or your viewpoint on the world exactly, but to me, you're somebody who embodies that process. Right? And in many ways, you know, I don't think of Buddhism as a religion or anything. I just think of it as a way of thinking. And dude, you got a beautiful mind, and I recognize that. And I know that you probably sacrificed a lot in your life.
Does this guy have a question, or is he just
because of your approach,
dick writing?
The way you've been operating. Now that said, long story short, I had a background as an engineer. I ran a project at NASA when I was in high school. Back in the day, I'm a little older, I'm 39, so you know, the crypto space wasn't available. You know, it was like when I was considering engineering, it was like be a electrical engineer.
Gosh, why won't this lady let me in, man?
You know, something along those lines. But I ended up that was the space for me, so I became a lawyer. Then realized that wasn't really the best space for me, and then I became a Hollywood writer, director, producer, and actually just quit the business. You know, after I had a movie that came out on Netflix. And during the and then a lot of the things shut down during the pandemic in terms of production and work. I said I have to figure out something else to do, you know, with my time and to make money. And I started getting into the crypto space. And the first thing that I did was buy some Bitcoin for like almost exactly a year ago. It was February 1st.
Okay, Cole. What's the question?
Okay, sure. I'll get to the point. I feel like the crypto space has like a Swiss Army knife mentality of everybody trying to outdo each other. Like, oh, you know, we've got scissors, we've got a knife, we've got a toothpick, we've got this, we've got that. And I think that it's being like driven by like this very capitalist mindset. And I guess what my question is this: how do you feel like we can clarify what crypto truly represents within the industry and to the larger world? I call it like the plumber problem, helping the average person understand what we really have in front of us.
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and thanks for the backstory. It kind of helps knowing where you're coming from. A
Right.
lot of times when people debate, they don't debate on facts; they debate on values. So you have the same set of facts, but because you have different values, you interpret them differently or you value them differently, and so as a result, you talk past each other. Okay, and so almost every debate you see is like, even if you establish a baseline, people don't start with, well, here are my values and here's where I come from. So you're coming from the value set of, well, I'm a Buddhist, and so you kind of put that out on the table, and you say, well, this is the way I look at the world, and these are my experiences. That actually does help, and I wish more conversations would be done that way. So that's just a little bit of an aside, and it's a beautiful thing that I've learned from many people I've worked with, including my chief of staff in the organization. Well, anyway, so yes, well, what's the point of this crypto thing? Like, what's the core of it? I just did a video before I did the space, and I'd say the three things that really matter at the heart of what we do in crypto. One is this concept of decentralization. Two is this concept of inclusive accountability, and three is this concept of governance. Everything else is a particular to a system you're applying this towards. But these are fundamental values that are built inside the system. And they're pretty easy to understand. Like decentralization, the model in your mind is, okay, it's like a Jenga tower. And you ask, how many blocks can I pull out, blocks or entities or people, before that tower falls over? So you can look at any institution, you can look at any system, you could look at anything in life, and just start pulling blocks out. And if you pull the right one out, usually they topple pretty quickly. We saw that in 2008 in the financial crisis. You pull out the Lehman Brothers block and the AIG block, and then boom, the whole thing just goes to hell. Holy shit, that's not a decentralized system. Okay, then inclusive accountability is your ability to verify something someone tells you. Okay, so Bitcoin, ADA, Ethereum, all of these real cryptocurrencies. If I send you a transaction, I send you some ADA, you don't trust me. You can install Daedalus, and it's going to let you know whether that ADA exists and it's been double spent or not. So that's an inclusively accountable transaction. The same for e-voting or any of these other systems. You can check your vote, verify that the vote was counted, and that the election system has integrity. When you start thinking this way, you start realizing a lot of shit in life, it does not have this property. You're just told, fucking trust me. Whatever, it is what it is. Your government is spending this much money on the military. Well, how do you know? Well, they told you. Like, I posted a video not too long ago, a few days ago, with a guy from the State Department saying, well, Russia's doing all this stuff. And a journalist
Come
was like,
on,
okay,
lady,
well,
let
what's
me
the
in.
evidence? And the State Department official was like, well, I just told you. He's like, yeah, but you just told me, but what's the evidence? Do you have evidence of the claim that you've made? And they said, well, no, I told you. Accept it. Deal with it. And it's just like, it's like a who's on first type of skit. It's a fucking crazy thing. Okay? So the third thing is governance, and that's your ability to influence and control the system, or if you have to accept the system as it is. So, you go to the hospital, you don't really get to change the hospital. It is what it is. You have to accept or reject it, and you can try to go to a different hospital, but you have to accept the way doctors are trained and credentialed. You have to accept the way allopathic medicine is. And a lot of institutions are like this way, universities, other things. Other things you have a say in. They're democratic in nature. You have a voice. Small or big, you can vote. You can say something. You can change that thing. So these are the fundamental three superpowers of cryptocurrency technology, is that they give you a different way of governing things. They give you a different way of thinking about structures of things that are usually a lot more democratic. They give you the ability to preserve inclusive accountability, and they also start having you think about how these systems fail and who's actually in control and so forth. Then you start saying, well, if I can start rebuilding the institutions of society, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, this is systematically this, or this institution is falling apart. When we start looking at that stuff, you start saying, well, if I'm going to rebuild it, how do I rebuild it? A lot of people who want to rebuild shit or tear stuff down, what they're really telling you is, I want to rebuild it with me in charge. That's what they're really saying. Or I want to rebuild it with my economic philosophy in charge. And if only you adopt this philosophy, then everything is going to be wonderful and magical. It's just a bunch of bullshit. It never ends up that way. Revolutions never end up that way. You just end up trading Peter for Paul, and you don't really solve the underlying problem. So really, what we bring to the table are those three things, and then we're building a new society at the end of the day, and a new society that has some rules to it. Instead of don't be evil, it's can't be evil. A new society that when you say you have human rights, those are actually respected at the algorithmic level. You have equal access to the system. There's no notion of somebody being more special than another person or having more access than another person.
Man, come on. Let other people ask questions.
In that respect.
This guy's going to talk for another 10 minutes.
Like that, like the laws of physics.
This cold guy, he's going to respond and probably ask another question.
Gravity
it's like,
applies
dude,
to you exactly the same way. There's a lot of mountaineers.
Let me get in there, bud.
And people falling out of planes have learned. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose in that respect. So it's nice to start saying, can we build a social laws of physics? And those things actually, we can constrain society this way. Because human beings at the end of the day, as you're aware, they can't be trusted. Human beings, they always are going to let you down. They're always going to lie to you. They always aren't going to live up to the promises and expectations. If not today, then tomorrow. So you need to get to first principles, and you need to get to correct by design, and you need to get to the system level things. And that's the heart of the cryptocurrency space, in essence.
Oh, would you mind if I ask a follow-up question based on how you responded? You mentioned who's on first, and like that's very prominent in the storytelling and improv world.
I knew it, dude. This guy's trying to... Dude, this guy, man.
As an outsider who's come into the space with the background that I had, there's a ton of engineers, there's a ton of developers, there's a ton of capitalists, and there's a ton of investors who I feel like, very much take for granted the fact that they can sit and listen to you process the information that you're saying to us right now and move forward with it in an enlightened way, hopefully. But again, there's still that gold rush mentality where everybody's trying to shortcut everything. You mentioned that. One of the glaring holes I really feel that is that also within this society right now, nobody listens anymore. Everybody just reacts. And that's a function of social media. Because we communicate with each other on social media by reacting. You like, you subscribe, you share, you have to touch your phone.
Oh my gosh, dude, this guy is so long-winded, bro.
One of the major things that's lacking in the space is there needs to be more people who are literally just storytellers in a sense. You're a great storyteller, you're a great orator, but people that understand how it is that you can grab people's attention and hold on to them in a way where you can really get them to hold on to this message that you're preaching right now. I think that's an issue. And to be honest with you, I'm not really a big fan of panels. Twitter Spaces are great because there's a lot more audience participation.
Come on, bro. Panels, wrap it up.
Over the course of my career, and they're mostly a waste of time. But what I do appreciate in a panel or any forum like this is is there something that we can do within this space where we can actually make some sort of commitment towards something that we could do that will actually move us towards our goals? And I'll say this, man, for you or anybody else that you want to connect me with at Cardano, I'd be more than willing to volunteer my time to find
oh my gosh, dude,
to relay your message to the greater crypto community, Web3 community, and beyond that, because I think you're head and shoulders above pretty much everybody else in the space. No shade to those people.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thanks for the offer. Storytelling is where it's at, and it's a fundamental human thing. For 10,000 plus years, humans have been telling each other stories since the invention of language, and then since before that. And we're hardwired genetically to remember stories, be inspired by stories, and that's why I love the hero's journey, Campbell. It's a fundamental human property. And so what we're right now doing is we're as an industry telling stories about society, where we came from, the history of money, rye stones, and commodity-backed money, gold-backed money, paper money, fiat money, okay? And we're moving to a new form of money, a new form of value. But why do we need to do that? Well, we're telling the stories of all the failures that have occurred with the system that we have now. You see, so you have to remember the past to be able to plan the future. And being able to tell that story in a way that inspires people, connects to people, and gets them motivated is a super important thing. And everybody has their role and their place, and some people are great engineers, and some people are great scientists, and some people are lawyers, and some people, all they do, they just talk to people, and they convince people that maybe this is a good idea. But what I try
Kick
to
this
do is
Cole
to start
guy out,
from
man.
first principles and fundamentals. Do you want to live in a world where you're treated with respect and dignity and equality, or not? And if you want that, then shouldn't you demand that of all the systems around you? It's a very basic thing, very simple thing. And then what happens is that you'll get all these objections, and that is all the programming that you've been given growing up, basically to convince you of something that's not true, to convince you that you deserve to be less than human. And really what this space is all about is deprogramming people and having them take a step back and realize that society as a whole is constructed by people no more special, no more better, no smarter than you. And you don't have to take it if you don't consent to doing it. That's the first piece of wisdom, the first truth. It's kind of like when you become a Buddhist, you learn about this notion of suffering and the ephemeral nature of the world and the noble truths, right? And then once you have that, you can kind of like start building yourself in a direction where you don't have that suffering that most people have. Well, there are noble truths to society and systems, and society and systems are built around problems and people. And we don't have the same problems we had 50 years ago or 100 years ago. We don't have the same technology that we had 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So why the fuck should we keep the same society and the same systems? We should be constantly vigilant to upgrade them and update them and modernize them. So the most productive thing I think people can do is just simply have a conversation. And you start with like what you did with your values. You put them out on the table so people know where you're coming from. And then you kind of gradually work your way to some basic universal principles. And then it's just a question of, well, what's the best tool to help get us there? And then it's a process. And then you can always find brilliant people to help get you along the way. All right.
Okay.
I got time for one more.
I'm going to go back to listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cole. All right. I got time for one more question.
No, man.
Genesis.
Hi, Charles. How far on the back burner is Legends of Valor?
Oh, I love you, man. This is like the best question in the world to end this shit on. You know, we're doing Crypto Bison. We're having a hell of a time doing Crypto Bison. I did write a skeleton of the plot for Legends of Valor and a sequel to the game. And I have a really good idea of what I'd like to accomplish and what I'd like to do. And what I need to get done now is get into the actual pre-game pipeline. So we need to start storyboarding some things and do NPC development, and we need to make some decisions like write a game design document. And you know, the problem is the original source material was very primitive because it came from an age of gaming before we learned a lot in RPGs. There's no class system, there's no leveling system, the magic system is very primitive, the combat system is incredibly simplistic. A lot of the things that we take for granted, a lot of the gamification techniques that you would use for an addictive game, a fun game, are just simply not there. And so everything basically has to be built, and there's a build or buy question. You can certainly inherit a game system like Pathfinder or GURPS or another thing, or you can build a bespoke system for a PC-related game. So I did actually end up looking at over 17 magic systems, from spell-based levels per day, spells per day systems to mana-based systems. I looked at a litany of things that have been done in industry, and there's some really cool and interesting ideas. I looked at a lot of systems. GURPS is a skill-based system. It doesn't have any feats, and you basically gain skill points as you gain experience, and you use that for your dice rolling system. Looked at a lot of level-based systems as well, and there's a lot of balancing mechanics that have to be figured out. And also there's a question of, do I build a new game world to embed Legends of Valor in, or do I actually use an existing game world to embed Legends of Valor in? So these are some of the open questions that we've been kind of shooting the shit on, and they have a big impact on time to market for the game. And then there's just a question of, what story do you want to tell? What lessons do do you want to teach people? What experiences do you want to take people on? One of the reasons why I love video games so much is it's one of the last, if not the last medium we have where you command, for the most part, people's undivided attention. You know, years ago I was in a movie and I looked at the person to the left of me, looked at the person to the right of me, and they were both on their cell phones while the movie was going on. And so you'd like to think a movie is like people get engaged and they're in, they're half in. You know, and games, video games, people, when you win, when you really have a great experience, they become so captured and enthralled in it, they can get lost for hundreds, if not thousands of hours. You know, Skyrim just launched its 10th anniversary edition last year, November of 2021.
That's
There are some
crazy.
people who have been playing that game, including Lex Friedman, for over 10 years and who have thousands of gameplay hours in that experience. They keep coming back for more, and they just keep finding something new and exciting, those subtleties inside of it. So it's just such a beautiful medium to tell stories and such a beautiful medium to have experiences. So, you know, I have grand ambitions for Legends of Valor. You know, I'd really like to tell great stories and inspire people, make people cry, make people happy, make them sad, make them angry. You know, I'd like people to really have deep philosophical conversations about, well, what the hell just happened? You know, really dig deep into the nature of good and evil. Ask questions like, what is the nature of love, and these types of things. And also, I'd love for people to explore new realities in ways that they've never considered. We live in a Euclidean world. We live in a three-dimensional world. It'd be really cool to show people non-Euclidean geometry. It'd be really cool to show people what hyperdimensional spaces look like and experience it and play with it. Kind of like the first time you guys played Portal or these types of things. And say, wow, shit, you know, like I have this new game dimension. What if you have variable time? These things. In a world of Magic, you could do that. In a fantasy setting, you could do that. So if you want to do a good job, you might as well go for fucking gold. Because I'm not here to make money. I'm here to tell a story. I'm here to inspire people. I have finite time on Earth. I've made well more than enough money. I don't need to make any more. Now is the time to actually do something fun and interesting and exciting. You know, the other thing is it has to be all experiences. It can't just be the gameplay. You have to have equally amazing voice acting. You have to have equally engaging AI inside the game world. There's miracles like GPT-3 and other things. There's a great thing called Scepter that came out of Carnegie Mellon that does generative dialogue. You remember from the old Zork games in the 1980s. It was super cool to pull that into Legends of Valor. And what about the soundtrack? You know, some of the best games ever made were the best games ever made because they beautifully paired music with the experience. Music that you hear 30 years later and you remember, whether it be Chrono Trigger or Baldur's Gate or Final Fantasy or, you know, any of these games that have just had phenomenal scores. So in addition to that, you know, one of the things I've been thinking very carefully about with Legends of Valor is how do we make music that is as memorable as any show or movie, and it kind of sticks with you for generations. And 25 years from now, you can hear it offhand, some kid playing it on a phone or on a plane, and it just brings back that just amazing feeling of elation and excitement. I remember Baldur's Gate when I was a kid. That entering dun 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 dun. You hear that, and it brings back so many amazing feelings to me whenever I hear that. You know, it's like recapturing my youth. That one thing. And man, if we could accomplish that with Legends of Valor, I think that'd be really cool. As a final point, you know, we're learning a lot about integrating cryptocurrencies, blockchains, NFTs. One of my biggest umbrages of these game experiences is that you can't really take them with you. You can keep the memories and you can keep the time invested, but you don't actually have a visual representation, artifact, something that's decoupled from the game world. And NFTs actually, for the first time ever, give you the ability to do that. Like what we're designing with Crypto Bison, we have a situation where all the gameplay gets captured into the NFT, and then other people can build their own Crypto Bison game, and you can import your Crypto Bison into their game. I don't know those people, but you know, now you can start playing with that NFT. So similarly, if we do Legends of Valor correctly, it would make a lot of sense for that game world to be something the other people in the game world can also use and people in that game world will be able to build their own experiences and import them. That's really ultimately, I'm going to think, going to make it fun. So it's something I take very personally, and I want to do a good job, and I want to make sure I have the right people to do a good job. And I kind of have this thing called Cardano I'm working on. It's pretty big. I think you've heard of it. We all like it, and so I'm going to make sure we get that. We're going to get that done. But it's certainly something I think about every day, and I really want to earn my way up to being able to have a shot at building something special for you guys. Anyway, you've all been great. I wish I could stay and chat, but unfortunately, I got to get to another thing. I had a lot of fun. You all take care now, okay?
And just like that, be sure to subscribe, like, follow, and share if you would like to spread the word about Cardano. If you are bullish on Cardano, even though I'm a Hexican, I love Hex, I love Pulsechain, I love PulseX, and I do like Cardano as well. It is one of my favorite projects as well. And so if you like Cardano also, be sure to smash the like, follow, and subscribe. And I will see y'all later. Peace.